rather than read to you from the book, which is a book I would love to read to you from at some point, but I have a kind of a larger fish to fry. It's a very big, important fish, a fish that looms over all of us all the time. It is, in fact, one of the major fish that we will grapple with in our lives as people who grapple with fish. And I know that that really includes all of us. And of course, I'm talking about death. Death is a topic that I've recently become very expert at. And I am here today to share with you my knowledge about death, the research that I did in producing my last book, etc. So, just generally, to talk about framing how we're going to do this presentation, we're going to cover some of the major questions about death. You know, starting at the top, like what is it? Who gets it? Who suffers from death? You know, why them as opposed to someone else? What happens after we die? Do we stay dead, or does some other thing happen? And then finally, for those of us who maybe are considering something other than death for our post-retirement, what really are the options that we have? That's kind of an overview. Now, death, I mean, what a topic, where to even begin? The all-encompassing reach of death's icy grasp has been a topic that has motivated thinkers and terrified everyone else for centuries. It has been, you know, my own literature aside, has been the source of some of the greatest words and some of the most poignant speech and poetry and philosophy of our times. William Shakespeare, for instance, the Bard of Avalon and the greatest extant writer in the English language, died in April of 1616. And you know, that's not uncommon at all. All the evidence that we have, everything's been left behind by history, was telling us is that everybody who's ever lived at all has eventually, as a direct result of that, died. Here's King Tutankhamun of Egypt, who is quite famously dead. Here's Princess Diana, a well-known dead person. Wasn't always dead, but sure is now. Recently dead. Less recently dead, here's Elvis Presley. Notoriously dead individual, so that's a typo. He's really quite dead. Steve Jobs, recent inductee to the class of the dead. Going back a little bit, here's Tupac Shakur, also quite dead. That's just a smattering of the dead people who are out there, well, no longer, but who were, and who are now deceased. Now, there are other people who are not yet dead, but who are going to die. You know, we know this with some certainty. Former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger going to die. Pope Ratzinger, the current Pope of the Catholic Church, slated for death. Pop singer Katy Perry. Right now, the future, not so much. And this kitten. Is going to die. In fact, being for a stock photo site, it may be dead already. But if not dead yet, certainly sometime in our lifetimes, the lifetimes of most of us. Looking more closer to home, here's Carlton Jones, a very important author in the scene. He's going to die. Here is our good friend Cameron Pierce, a young, powerful, friendly man in the prime of life. But destined to reach an untimely, tragic ending sometime in the next 100 to 150 years, or perhaps sooner. Jeremy Robert Dawson, of course, death famously, you know, may die really soon, or may live on and then eventually die later. I myself am not immune to this situation. I currently expect at some point to die, and of course, all of you will die. Yes! So that's the people who will be dying in the future. Now, as for people who are currently dying, here on the Edgefield campus, not so many, although it was a place where many great deaths occurred in its history. However, not so far from here, if you were to get on 84 and head towards Portland, there's a variety of fine hospitals where you can take people in various states, or throes as they call them, of death. And you know, the actual names and faces change out a lot of time, but there's always somebody there. They're usually kind of happy to have company. Furthermore, if you want to, you know, we have not just one hospital, we have a great research oncology clinic called Oregon Health Sciences University on the other side of the river. And if you go to meet the dying people there, you get to ride this really cool tram. So, confronted with so much death, it's a really reasonable question to ask, well, why? Why so much death? That's not even the next slide, is it? Oh, yes. I forgot to mention that it's not just people. This is a really interesting thing. It's so far beyond the human experience. It's not only people who die, animals also die. And vegetables, in fact, all the time experience a cessation of their life. Hard drives die of cancer, and they're not even alive. Automobiles die with alarming regularity. You know, telephones die almost every day. Somebody has trouble with their phone just dying while they're talking on it. And that's, you know, touches us all so deeply. The ancient library of Alexandria is no more. It is completely dead and gone. Punk rock died. As did disco. So, death surrounds us, envelops us, you know, it's almost a definition of the eventual state of all things that we know and can think about, and that's pretty cool. But why? Where does it come from? What causes death? You know, people have been asking these questions about death for centuries, and in modern times, you know, statisticians have been particularly fascinated with the study of death, and they've been able, through their detailed knowledge of death, to produce some amazing charts. Here's one of those charts. This is reasons why people are dying around the world. It's mostly, you know, parasites. Here in the United States, it's a lot more, you know, hamburgers, basically. Here's where people are dying. Africa, mostly. Asia, somewhat. Everywhere a little bit, for sure, but some people a lot more than others. And is that fair? No. Here's a chart demonstrating something really fascinating about here's some people who apparently didn't need to die. Sucks for them. Particularly tragic one here. Now here's some people who are dying more than everybody else is dying. Fishermen, definitely dying all over the place. You know, aircraft pilots and flight engineers, sucks for them. Here's some people who died by mistake. Oops. Don't let it happen to you, I guess, is the lesson we've got here. These people all got shot in the face. Some other part of their body. And pretty much died from that. And if all this information is kind of hard to grab at once, this is a really great chart that just kind of like wraps it all together in a really easy to follow infographic that you can consult back to again and again. So I hope that that's cleared up a lot of the leading causes of death, but equally fascinating, if not more so, to me, are the trailing causes of death. Some of the many, many exquisite minor forms, if you will, the kind of like, you know, what was that island that Darwin went to? No, not Galapagos, the other one. No, England, thank you. All of the different forms that death takes there. For instance, going way back to the early history of our country, there's this guy named Governor Morris. He was an early politician, statesman, and government employee of the United States. He was actually a signer of the Constitution, and in 1816, he died after sticking a piece of whalebone through his urinary tract to remove a blockage. Wow. and died. A little bit later, 1927, Isadora Duncan, who was a famous modern dancer and artist of her era, a beautiful woman and incredibly graceful. She died because a really long scarf that she was wearing flew out the window of her convertible and wrapped around the rear axle of the car while she was driving it. Sucked for her. And later in 1967, this man, very famous to our Soviet friends, cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov, became the first human being to die in outer space after his really poorly manufactured capsule kind of malfunctioned in every way it could at the same time. Oops. Now, in 1974, a woman named Deborah Gale Stone, who's a Disneyland employee, became the first and only person we know of to be crushed to death between a moving wall and a stationary wall inside of the revolving America Sings attraction. And you can go there and see that today. It's really a charming place, and they sing, and she was killed. In 1979, that's just 5 years later, a man named Robert Williams, a Ford Motor worker, became the first human being to be killed by a robot. That was really exciting. It was a giant leather machine, and it swung her arm around and decapitated him pretty severely at work. Only a few years later, in 1982, a gentleman named David Brenman became the first American to be killed by a cactus. He was discharging his shotgun at the base of the cactus, and one of the arms of the cactus broke free and fell on him, crushing him painfully to death. Similarly, in 1991, a man named Carl Holsley of Cherokee County, Georgia, was butted to death by his pet goat. He had been training it to be a guard animal by being mean to it. And on similar lines, in 2006, a man named Steve Irwin, sorry, that's not him, that's him. Steve Irwin, a well-known Australian television personality and zoologist, was stabbed through the heart by the barb of a, what do they call those things? Short-tailed stingray. While filming a documentary about said stingray, the stingray had not actually signed any kind of consent paper. And they had a disagreement, and boom, dead. In 2007, just 1 year later, this woman died from not urinating. Oh no! Oh. She was taking part in a radio station contest called Hold Your Weed for a Weed. Posthumously, she was awarded a Nintendo Wii. Which, when you die, you'll realize that it doesn't hold a lot of weight in the afterlife, if there is one, even. The very next year, this gentleman, Isaiah Otiento, a Kenyan exchange student from Sacramento, died. No, yeah, he was living in Cranbrook, British Columbia. A helicopter fell on him. And strangely enough, just 2 years later, Mike Edwards, a founding member of the Electric Light Orchestra, was crushed by a bale of hay. That's him on the right, before he was crushed. So many dead. So much death. The past, the present, the future. Everywhere. All of us, everyone we know. Death, death, death.